Welcome back to another episode of the Max Stern Podcast. Kyle Stitch here alongside James Finch. And today we're just going to bounce around the NHL again. Feels like a lot actually has happened in this past week. I guess it shouldn't be that surprising because we're still in kind of the first half of July, not that far removed from unrestricted free agency, but it felt like every day something interesting kind of occurred each of the past couple days, and more will occur with arbitration hearings kind of on the very immediate horizon and everything. So appreciate you listening. Max Stern Podcast available on all major podcast platforms. Plus, you can watch us talk to you, maybe see some graphics that we might try to start integrating, maybe this episode, maybe in the future, on YouTube, AFP Analytics on YouTube as well. We're AFP Analytics on YouTube, not
Yep.
not Max Turn Podcast. So I think if you search for either, you'll probably find us though. And all our content, including contract projections that we continue to try to stay on top of as they arrive in contracts and content, afpanalytics.com, and then our analysis on X, mostly at AFP Analytics, Blue Sky Threads. We haven't been cross posting quite as much for these contracts, given we're trying to get our analysis out in a timely manner. And it seems like the teams and everything are very good at dropping these at very inconvenient times for us these days. So, yeah, this afternoon, we're recording this Thursday evening. This afternoon, two contracts dropped as I'm trying to leave work and you were trying to make dinner for your family. So,
Yep.
we got them out, but anyways,
Is what it is. It
it is what
happens.
it is. We're doing our best to stay on top in a timely manner, but we're starting to also get past that point as well, where if we don't get something, we'll try and catch up at some point, but not a big deal. So I think we'll start going backwards a little bit, and then we'll kind of work a little bit forwards. So what was it, last week? I think that's where we wanted to start. Is there anyone late last week, or did we want to just start this Monday, which seems like late last week? I think probably just
Um,
Monday.
Monday was the
Peyton
12th,
Krebs, Braden Schneider.
13th.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Krebs. So this was, I guess, at the start of the offseason, kind of an interesting one, to project at least, because he's kind of been that bottom six, kind of solid all around for a bottom six player. Um, as he would need to be up in the lineup a little bit, sometimes you'd start to see the flaws a bit more. Um, but at the same time, he was one of those players that was able to jump up and be serviceable in a bigger role. And then this past year, much more often, he found himself higher in the lineup. Ended up, I believe, having a career year points wise. Um, Looked pretty solid. So we had projected 3 by 3.5. Um, I think pretty quickly, especially July 1st, once we started to see like where the true fourth liners were falling. Um, this could have been one that we looked at and said, all right, he's probably going to be able to fetch a little bit better than 3.5 because, quite honestly, some very clear fourth line guys, very little offensive ability, were signing just below that.
AJ Greer 4 by 4 2 5, for example.
AJ Greer, McCarron came in, I believe that
3.3.
was
Yep.
3.3. Like, so Krebs should have a little bit of a better deal coming his way, and ultimately he did. So 4.5 million. And quite honestly, like with where the market's going, that's probably very fair. Um, Especially for a player again who can kind of jump up, play a much larger role, if needed, and be pretty solid in the bottom six.
Well, it did start as a 4 by $3.5 million contract by Elliot Friedman for about 5 minutes, and then as soon as I had finished posting all our analysis, he corrected it, and it's like, thank you. That's it looked like a really, really good deal for Buffalo
Yes.
with 4 years of term because our projection was only 3 years. I think that was what as much as kind of figuring out where the Sabres, I guess it was figuring out how the Sabres valued him was very much a struggle. Like as an restricted free agent, we kind of have to factor that into our analysis a little bit is how is his retaining team going to value him? I I think we'll end up diving a little bit more into Buffalo because there's a little bit more smoke and discussion to be had there in a second. So I could have seen Buffalo trying to go anywhere from a 1 year to 4, 5, 6 years, get Krebs locked in as a core piece for quite a while. None of those outcomes would have been surprising to me whatsoever. They could have just walked him to unrestricted free agency with the plan to move on in a couple of years. That would have been a 2 year contract. So as
Yep.
soon as the term came in 4 years, the and with everything else you laid out, the average annual value had to be higher.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
has to get fair market value for like decent third line center money because even if he actually never played that role, that kind of is the happy medium between him playing in the top six and him playing on the fourth line. That's kind of where he had to slot in, and ultimately that's where he did slot in. I mean, that's
Yep.
only 250,000 more than Colton Sissons. So
Is that like a subtle jab at Toronto?
that contract is still maybe the most mind blowing
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
offseason.
Yep. But yeah, so overall, Krebs like it's a deal that makes sense
Yeah.
value wise, especially as you mentioned that extra year over what we projected, because it's an extra UFA year that's gonna bump it.
And again, it's kind of a statement on how Buffalo values him to commit that type of term. I think to me that was the biggest question, not
Yeah.
necessarily if you had told me what term that he was going to get going into the offseason, I think we would have been able to kind of pinpoint what the average annual value is going to be, but kind of trying to basically factor in it could be one, it could be six, and where's the correct happy medium to give a sense of where his market value lies.
Yep.
It again, it could have been anything.
It's also one of those situations where like even if we could sort of figure out what one side is thinking, let's say Buffalo, if they weren't valuing him here and they were like, no, you're more of a fourth line guy, but we want to try and get you for like 3 years. Krebs is going to sit there and say, well, I just did pretty well filling in higher up in the lineup. So why would I sign something 3 years? So there was just a lot of unknown. Um, Even if we could kind of try and figure out one side, neither side was really clear of like, okay, what's going to happen here. Um, if you told me Krebs really wanted a 1 year deal so he could try and prove it again and say, look, I just put together 2 years of solid play high in the lineup, that would make a lot of sense. So it is one of those situations that was just very hazy.
Yeah, pulling from the weather, well,
Yes.
the the smoke today in
Yep.
Western New York. I will say, if this had dragged out and they went to arbitration, I think that would have been real ugly real quickly because both sides would have had some very strong arguments that they could have made and pointed to for why, in Krebs' case, why he deserves more because he played up in the lineup a lot last year. Or in Buffalo's case, there's flaws in his game, and he also was a career fourth liner, except when someone was injured, basically, and even in a fourth line role at times struggled to have much of an impact and drive any sort of scoring. So though that could have been a really, really ugly arbitration, and both sides could have ended up very unhappy with where things kind of ended up. So it's probably good that it got done. What that does now mean is Buffalo has a lot of forwards under contract. Discussion about how they fit in, and then tie that into they haven't really made too many additions outside of Zellweger and Crevier this offseason. They we had talked about going into free agency. They could be done. I mean, cap space wise, they could potentially be done, and it would be a fine place to sit. Like they're not right at the cap, but they're pretty darn close. I'm not going to knock them if they don't spend more. But they've been connected to two names. A lot of smoke around Patrick Kane coming back and finishing his career with his hometown team. And then the smoke will not go away surrounding Connor Hellebuyck, whether seemingly still around Buffalo. But the most interesting thing recently is schedule release has come out the past couple days. Winnipeg Jets put something up on, like, put a bunch of graphics on their social media and included half of their team basically. So you would think that anyone who's anyone would be in that. Hellbuck's face did not appear once. So that was some of the reporting kind of makes me wonder where this situation's going. Is it Buffalo? Is it somewhere else? But I think there's a discussion to be had about the forwards, Hellebuyck, how all this fits together.
Yeah, so ultimately the strength and depth for Buffalo is up front. Um, I think you can kind of connect the dots of all of this. So getting Krebs done, and quite honestly, 4 years, we can call it longer term. It's not like a short term deal. Um, I think that is very, very much on purpose, and let's get a depth score locked in for a handful of years. When there's rumors about the Hellebuyck trade, names start to get thrown around. So Jack Quinn's name has been out there, which he believe is extension eligible right
Correct. Yeah.
now. So in line for likely a bit larger of a deal next off season, at least, if
Here,
not sooner.
let's real quickly, since we're talking about Winnipeg, since we're talking about Jack Quinn and in current events, might as well just throw it out right now. So Jack Quinn's probably just looking at this deal. Cole Perfetti just signed with Winnipeg, six by
Yeah.
six, as the as where his next contract's very likely to lie. That was pretty close to what we had projected for Perfetti, a little bit under. Sorry, 5 points, 5 years by 6 million per year. I said 6 by 6 to
Yeah.
be
We,
five
we
years.
were we were like 400K higher.
Yes.
Yep.
So, but very much, yeah. So very much in our expected market value there. That's probably what Jack Quinn's looking at for his next contract because comp wise, they're very, very similar right now. So is Buffalo willing to pony that up? Is Winnipeg continuing this discussion willing to pay another similar type of player who's showing flashes, but some inconsistencies, a very similar type of contract as well? But his name is definitely front and center for Connor
Yeah.
Hellebuyck, but we'll continue with the Hellebuyck discussion. But I think kind of interesting segue that needed to be kind of said right there.
Yeah. Quinn is obviously one of the pieces out there. Every once in a while, McLeod's name gets mentioned, which makes a lot of sense as a target for Winnipeg, but maybe not as much sense for Buffalo to move him. That said, people kind of point out in the playoffs, he did end up getting a bit of a lesser role. Um, so maybe that plays into things there, but those are kind of two established forward names that have been rumored, and then you start to get into more of the NHL ready prospects. So, um, Osland, Hellenius, Hellenus. Ah, that one almost got me.
Listening to Friedman too much.
Yep. Um, Kulik. I don't. That's an iffy one trade wise, but call them NHL ready prospects. Those are kind of the three guys for Buffalo. Um, him coming back from a blood clot would probably complicate things with a trade, so it's probably not him.
At least in the off
Um,
season.
yeah, so like you would think teams would kind of want to see him on the ice playing a little bit and make sure things are good. But that's a lot of depth. Now nothing's happened yet. Um, Initially the idea was okay, Norris could be someone who could potentially interest Winnipeg. Trade clause kicks in. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen as a goalie going back. Trade clause click. Yes. Trade. It was 5 team,
Yeah.
no trade.
Yeah.
Kicks in. So, and I think it was even reported recently that Winnipeg is on his no trade clause, which I think that was fairly predictable would be likely to happen. Um, so it seems like this forward depth is where like the key pieces of a deal are going to be coming from. And I think that kind of also ties into Patrick Kane. So I'm not saying this whole Hellebuyck situation is being held up by Patrick Kane, but in theory, there could be an offer on the table from Buffalo to Winnipeg that says, all right, if Patrick Kane signs with us, we're good to move Jack Quinn in this deal. Like that's plausible. So like in a way, like Buffalo might be kind of waiting to see like, okay, if we need to move Quinn and one of those younger guys, there's two forwards from our depth gone. Let's make sure we can bring in another outside forward. Um, and I think the other thing to remember, I've seen some people mention this a little bit. These young guys for Buffalo, it's very exciting. They've flashed very good skills in the NHL. Um, I believe it was those last three, Kulik, Osland, and Hellenus, are all still able to be sent down to Rochester without waivers. Um, so there's wiggle room that if there isn't a deal Buffalo likes, this log jam, even though it is kind of one, they don't have to act in the off season. It could happen during the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Right now, it would be very tough to move out of Jack Quinn, for example, without having a Patrick Kane secured because you look, there's a lot of names, but I think a lot of the names currently not. So, as you just said, a lot of the obvious names to play in potentially top six roles are also the waiver exempt guys. If you're going to go that route and kind of asset manage that way, which would be a fair decision to make, especially like Kulik, who has not played in basically a year and coming off a very serious situation,
Yeah.
it would make sense for him to go down. The other
Is he
two,
playing every night? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's play a game, take one off, and ease back in. Don't know that, but well, as you're saying, like that's plausible.
and then the other two, Oslin and Helnus, they can easily go down. Those are also names that you would hope that might be filling out your top six, especially if you don't have a Jack Quinn. And now, but bringing in Patrick Kane gives you a little bit more flexibility there where you don't have to count on those two, three guys to make an impact without Quinn on the roster without some injuries. It gives a little bit more depth. And this is kind of the argument for why I wasn't fully bought into Buffalo getting Robert Thomas at the trade deadline is they would have had to deplete a bunch of their kind of top six potential assets to package them all together for one guy. it would have made sense in the offseason because then you bring in someone like a Patrick Kane that can then slot and fill one of those depth spots. That's the similar type of idea right now is if you're going to go and get Hellebuyck or package a couple of these forwards together, well, whether it's Hellebuyck or someone else, you now have the ability to at least sign someone else to as a backup plan to play in your top six or third line or whatever to make sure that you're insured.
Yep.
With Krebs signing this deal, I wonder if that does make McLeod a little bit more expendable because to me, those two players slot in long term in a very similar spot.
Potentially. I think it also depends, like, is Krebs, he spent a lot of time last year on the wing, and maybe that was just due to what was needed at the time, but it is he more winger than center? Debatable. But I think it's just fair in general to point out, like, as you move one guy, like right now, there's space for Quinn, Hellenus, Osland in this lineup. Now, maybe not Kulik. So let's say right now he's down in the AHL. Okay, there's a little depth. Maybe they ease him back into games. If you move Quinn, is Kulik coming up? If you're not ready to do that, you have a hole. So it's very possible moving one forward out, you need to bring Kane in. Which again, I don't know this, but it seems like it could impact a potential Hellebuyck deal of let's make sure we've got someone coming in before we send someone like Quinn or a McLeod or Quinn and one of those young guys. We don't know exactly what the price is going to be. Um, the other thing I will say, just Patrick Kane in a vacuum for all the Buffalo fans who are anti adding Patrick Kane, because we've got enough, whatever, second line, third line forwards who can score. I guarantee 90% of those fans are also checking the box of fans that absolutely were losing their minds about the power play. Patrick Kane, if anyone's going to come in and help fix a power play, he's still elite there. That's pretty much where his value is at this point. So,
Yeah,
like Patrick Kane in a vacuum kind of fits one of the main issues many Sabres fans, including myself, have kind of had with the team in recent years.
yeah, and the spot that Kane would play is was the weak link on the first unit in particular. He would play the opposite half wall across from where Tage Thompson generally set up. So that would make I agree. It makes a lot of sense. I also fully understand where is he going to slot in a lineup right now with
Yes.
both Quinn and McLeod, plus now Krebs, plus some of these young guys. I
Yeah.
extended
It
like
it's very much like there's got to be more dominoes that fall
correct.
if this is happening.
So I think last point for Buffalo, and we'll move on real quickly. They have the cap space to bring in Kane because it can be a bonus heavy contract, which would mean he would get a very low base salary this year with probably some achievable bonuses that would push his total earnings up to whatever is fair for him, $4 or $5 million probably. But then, if necessary, Buffalo can add those to next year's salary cap where they don't have to deal as much with the Jeff Skinner buyout dollars. So that would be a way to structure that. And then if you're sending out a Quinn, McLeod, and or Luukkonen, whether it's to Winnipeg or in a subsequent trade package, like New Jersey as a Luukkonen destination's been thrown out, that would make some sense. The cap space would work because you're going to
Oh
have
yeah.
to send out some NHL players to be able to bring Hellebuyck in anyways, just from a pure roster spot standpoint. So cap space wise, they can make it work. They can get both no problem. It's just is the price for a Hellebuyck palatable enough depending on what it's going to include off of their NHL roster or NHL ready prospects.
Yep.
So the other interesting signing that day, I think Krebs was in the morning and then Braden Schneider was in the afternoon. Schneider was arbitration eligible, 1 year, $5.5 million, which was fairly above what we had projected. I'm assuming you're fact checking what our projection was.
Yeah. So we pretty much had 1 year 4.1 on his short term. Um, One of the interesting things, and I guess to quickly kind of describe what we put out there. So our contract graphics that have comps, those aren't necessarily comps that an agent would just take and use in arbitration. They are some comps of players that were comparable. Um, in arbitration, you are pretty much using very recent comparable players. One of the names we had on our contract graphic for Schneider was Cody Ceci, and his deal um, with Ottawa was a 1 year, 4.3 million. And at the time, that was 5.41% of the cap. And this deal that Schneider signed with New York was 5.29% of the cap, so a little bit under. So even though the deal came in quite above our overall projection, the 4.1 million, like it's not completely off the board for me. There is kind of an outlier comp that we're referencing right now in Cody Ceci. He was quite a bit above the rest of the comps on a short-term deal, but it was there. It's not unheard of for someone like Schneider to get this level of a contract. Um, and honestly, knowing the way the offseason has gone, I'm not completely shocked, really, that there was quite a bit of a bump in value given to him. Um, so yeah, like it's on the surface quite a lot, but also maybe this is just the new norm.
It's more what it says about, I think, longer term, even short term and longer term, what the Rangers are kind of thinking here. They, they could have played hardball and probably gotten a smaller contract in arbitration. I will
Yep.
almost guarantee it. They now have they have enough cap space, but it's down to about $2 million, $2-3 million, somewhere in there, depending on who stays up, who goes down. We'll just say 2 to 4.
Yep.
So that means they kind of are done adding. So their roster kind of is what it is at this point for this year. The rationale for probably giving Schneider a nice contract now and avoiding arbitration is to not make the long-term relationship irreparable,
Yeah.
which usually is what happens when you go the arbitration route. So they clearly see a long-term marriage still as a very distinct possibility, which is another, I don't know if I like Schneider as a player. I don't know if I agree with the Rangers' decision to continue stringing this out. It's a little bit like Keandre Miller last offseason, where you kind of are going to come to a point in the road where you have to make a decision, commit or trade them. And we're starting to get to that point. The longer they string this out, the more leverage Schneider is going to have in this situation.
The other thing, just from a roster management, asset management standpoint, that is, I guess I'll call it weird, is they just traded for Sean Dursey. Is I assume Dursey plays in their top four. So does this slide Schneider out of the top four? Because they also traded for Marcus Pettersson. So Gavrikov, Fox, Pettersson, Dursey, Schneider. Like I guess Schneider could push into that top four. Maybe they try and run their pairs much more equal. similar to kind of how Washington has done their defensive pairs in recent years. But it's interesting that they just acquired a top four right shot defenseman with 2 years left on his deal, and then kind of handing Schneider a pretty solid 1 year payday. Um, and I guess that just kind of adds to the questionable of like, what is the long term here? You're likely keeping him happy at this AAV, but like, are you gonna end up trading him? It just kind of is a weird situation again, for the Rangers.
Yeah. And that's where like I don't mind giving him the contract to make sure you don't go to arbitration to keep it as a possible long-term relationship, but I don't understand as you just laid out the logic in the bigger picture here. And at this point, if you still are having questions about him being a long-term fit with the additions you just mentioned, why would you not be exploring a trade for him? See what type of value you can get. Because I think they could get a much more impactful player for their lineup this year using that 5.5 million on that player than they're going to get by now having a one of Jersey Schneider or Marcus Pettersson playing in their on their third pair.
Yep.
So interesting. We'll circle back to Schneider in a few minutes with the arbitration and everything. But I think maybe we're going to go right there. Real quickly, Nick Robertson, basically as projected with Pittsburgh, 2 years, 3.25 million, which again is basically what we were kind of expecting his market value was. I like him as a bet. I think I've said it before. I
Yeah.
like him as a bet in Pittsburgh a lot. I think there'll be an opportunity. I think he showed things in Toronto, like positives in Toronto, and never really got a enough of an opportunity in the top six, which is interesting, especially
Yeah.
given how last year kind of went for Toronto. But he's someone that I would be very, very high on having a very good season or two very good seasons coming up here.
A lot of skill, smaller player, 5'9". So maybe that factors into a little bit. Um, but yeah, I like the bet. It's low cost. Um, and again, the skills there, so it could be a sneaky fit, especially for a team who tends to throw some random fourth liner next to Crosby. Um, Robertson might be able to do up a little bit better.
Yeah.
Um, Mantha
Yeah.
signed with the New Jersey Devils, which I actually kind of like that pairing a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's a deal that came in a little bit under, which is kind of, I think we mentioned this in the post, that we put out about it. But once we kind of get this far into July, the UFAs that are left tend, especially some names that might be a little bit bigger names, they tend to not get what we projected. Just ultimately, the value is not quite there. So we had 4 by 6.3, 6.4, signs a 2 year deal at 4.75. So they kind of waited out the market. Mantha was left there. 30 plus goals last year, and they need scoring up front, good goal scorers. This, I think this was a good, smart play by the Devils. Good signing.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that this was much needed because depth scoring was a big need. And our kind of UFA matchmaker, you had Bunting, I had Victor Olofsson as fits for New Jersey. They very much went that route and found that
Yep.
type of player probably a little bit better than both those types of players if Mantha can stay healthy. So yeah, I agree. Very good. And I'm glad you brought up the point because of we're now at the point where all our probably most of our unrestricted projections are going to be a little bit high versus what they actually sign. And that's because, as you alluded to, there's just not the same robust market. Like if they're still out here at this point, it's because they're not getting the level of interest that was expected for them. Or your name is Patrick Kane and you're just stringing this out to for the for the pure reason to be able to make a long-term decision. You see LeBron and you see Aaron Rodgers do it, so you think you have to do it too at that age. That's just how it goes, I guess.
Maybe he'll take his talents to South Beach. Well,
Maybe.
next up was Perfetti. We kind of discussed him a little
Yep.
bit. Ultimately, I think from the Winnipeg Jets standpoint, smart to get him locked in long term, especially with just the lack of forwards with any real chance of putting up numbers. Um, Keep the guy who can score. Um, Anything else you want to add on him? I know we talked about him a little earlier too, sort of.
Him him and Bjork would be a could be a very fun kind of pair on a second line. A little bit smaller, but kind of tenacious with some skill. That could be kind of fun to watch for Jets
Yeah,
fans. I don't know who they put with those two, but I kind of
Jack
see
Quinn.
that as like a very who?
Jack Quinn.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so.
It
That could work.
I just I will say because kind of the noise around Perfetti, there wasn't a ton, but just kind of like, is this a long-term fit? Ultimately for Winnipeg, like they just badly need forwards who can produce.
Yeah.
Um, Now he's had some up and down production, but it's been there before. I think he has it in him, and they just need to get more forwards capable of playing in a top six on that team. Um,
I will say last point on Perfetti real quickly, and then we'll move on. I don't know if we got more negative, I wouldn't do that reactions to any contract than Cole Perfetti's long-term contract. And yet he comes in pretty close to where we were projecting.
yeah.
And that's from fans to be clear.
Oh yeah. Yes.
But yeah, I don't know. That one to me was a very interesting sentiment that like unanimously Winnipeg fans were like, I wouldn't do that, and that's what they ended up doing.
So it's tough, like looking at a team like that. Pretty much, other than like Shifley and Connor, kind of down years. So other than like your superstar forwards, just everything was down about Winnipeg.
Yeah,
Is every player at fault for that? Yes and no. Like you got to kind of figure that out a little bit. And I think with Perfetti, you have just the situation the team's into, you have to bet on a bounce back there.
yeah,
Next notable one was Trevor Zegras with
yep,
Philadelphia.
yep.
So we had 5 by 8.2, ends up getting 4 by 9.125. So about 900K off. Um, Usually like one less year than projected. We'd think it'd be down a little bit. At the same time, someone who seems to be becoming a solid first line winger. Um, with where this market is shifting, I'm not shocked that one less year he's still coming in um above projection. If Philly's looking at him, okay, 4 years, we can write him in pen left wing one. You're fine paying a little over 9 mil.
Yeah.
Especially for a player that you're buying a couple, maybe even
Two,
three,
two or probably three.
because he
Yeah,
played right
three.
away.
Yeah, because he
Three
would have had his
UFA
three
years,
year
yeah.
ELC and then three RFA years. So yeah,
Okay. Then yeah, I mean, it seems like with the cap rising, teams are ponying up a little bit more money. So I'm fine with that deal. Would I have liked to see it be 7 years? Yes, obviously, but there's been a lot of 4 or 5 signed this offseason.
We might be clipping that back a year and putting and cold taking exposed you for saying would have I liked it to be 7 years? Yes, absolutely, because it was only one good year for Zegras. Yes, new team, new change of
Well,
scenery and everything, but
but
it
let me say this. Like I'm more saying like if you could have done 7 years, 9.2 or whatever, like pretty much where he's at, that would be great.
yeah.
It's just not what's happening now.
What I was kind of jokingly getting at is my one concern here is 1 year of sample size of after two very, very down
True.
years. That like
True.
so as long as he stays at this level of production, yes, you want 7 years. Kind of jokingly, like, well, what if he drops back down next year? You're not going to want him on the books for 7 years at that point. So it's kind of I don't know. I don't have reason to believe he won't sustain or take a step forward, but just given he's kind of
Well,
had a roller coaster career so far.
let's kind of jump on since we have a little bit of a tumultuous relationship with Flyers fans, let's continue it a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Trevor Zegras is not a fast player on the ice, which is interesting. I think if you were just to ask anyone and try and gauge perception, it might not be what people think about Trevor Zegras, but he's not really a fast player, or at least he doesn't play fast. He's not physical at all. He's not a center anymore, really. Like sometimes he's not good at faceoffs. He's not adding a ton of value in his own end. He did have a decent defensive season this year, but as far as like shot blocking, stuff like that, it's not happening. He's kind of the slow, not physical, I'm just gonna pass pretty well and I've got a decent shot. And sometimes that works for players, but other times that can kind of be enough red flags popping up that like if he has an off year shooting wise or kind of the team around him isn't shooting well, like some of his offensive production could tick down and then there's not a whole lot else going on in his game that is truly impacting in a positive way.
You basically described current Patrick Kane, who's still an unrestricted free agent that might sign for just a couple
Yeah.
million.
Yeah.
Again, are we expecting that to be the case with Zegras? Not necessarily, but I think there's pros and cons to going 4 years, and a pro could be it's quicker and easier to actually get out of that contract.
True.
One, well, we're going to probably stay on Philly for a little while, but as you were originally kind of bringing up Zegras, I popped into my head. How does this affect Michikov? How does his contract, Zegras's, affect Michikov? Because this is around where Michikov was I think we had him projected a touch higher than this, but this average annual value is not too far away from where we were thinking he would be. Zegras just outperformed him, but might not have the same upside.
Matvey Michkov. Long term. Oh, I remember doing this. So 8 years, pretty much 8 years, 10 million was um was the projection. The reason I remember doing it was I pretty much did Demidov and Michkov back to back. And from a pure like numbers, underlying numbers standpoint, I was kind of like Michkov had a better season than Demidov. Now Demidov lit it up in the playoffs. Like that was kind of his arrival. Um, which didn't really factor in too much to our projections, but Um, the overall production, so goals, assists, points, wasn't really there yet with Michkov, and there was a lot of noise around him all season of like just not doing the right things on the ice, blah blah blah, whatever. Didn't show up in the best shape or something. I'm not going to pretend I know everything
No.
there. From an underlying number standpoint, I love this player, and I would like so I was comfortable with a projection at about 10 million over 8 years. Um, and I think just another season in, I would think his floor on a long-term deal or even at talking 5 years is kind of that Zegras value. And it would
Zegras
very much
Demidov.
make sense where Demidov landed.
Yeah.
Like that's the floor I think for Michkov is a touch above 9.
So that's kind of so we had Zegras 8.25. We had Demidov what 8 and a little bit below 9, and then we had
Yeah.
Michikov 1 to almost 2 million above those players.
We
Both
had
of those.
Demidov 8.3.
Okay, so we had Michikov basically a 1.6 above both those players, and both those players end up coming in almost around 9.
Yep. Like that's a floor. It,
Yeah. And then how high is the ceiling, especially if he has a good year this year?
if the production takes a step, that's going up.
Yeah.
Um, Connor McMichael traded from Washington to St. Louis, was arbitration eligible, signs what we'll call a long-term contract. 6 years, 6.75. We had 5 years at about 6.5. Um, fine deal. This past year wasn't quite as strong as the previous for him, but still pretty solid player. Probably second line guy, maybe a really good third line guy, depending on how the lineup shakes out. Center wing flexibility. Um, yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about this deal. I think it's pretty fair.
One thing I'll point out, just kind of interesting, is McMichael was traded for Jordan Kyrou, who
Yep.
was rate in the $8 million cap hit wise. So not coming in significantly below McMichael. St. Louis adds a second or a first round pick in addition to McMichael to kind of bridge that perceived gap between the two. One thing that I'll be interested to kind of see the next couple of years is whether that first round pick and saving 1 million ish on the cap is actually going to turn out to be a good idea for St. Louis, or if they gave up a player that was due to kind of bounce back.
Yeah.
That's the one question that I kind of have been pondering a little bit with that, is just kind of looking at those two players in comparison. Both had down years. I feel much better about Jordan Kyrou getting up to a back up to a borderline first line
Yeah.
winger level than McMichael's topped out at probably second line. Is saving that $1 million for only a first round pick and potentially a pretty significant talent drop going to be worth it or not? That's kind of a story that I'll be interested to follow with St. Louis giving this contract. Is it fair value? Yes. I'm more questioning their overall thought process of kind of the asset management with the players here.
Did also seem like there was a lot of noise around Cairo, and it was kind
Mhm.
of like one of those situations where it was time to make a deal happen, um, which plays into it as
Yeah.
well.
And yeah, I'm not saying that it's not a
Well,
good
I'm with
idea,
you.
but
Like ceiling wise, Cairo is the top player in that deal for sure. So where do their bounce backs land them, and where does that um, leave us as far as thinking the 8 mil versus the 6.75? We don't know yet, but I am with you. Like, that's kind of to be determined whether or not this was a smart play by St. Louis or just kind of like not great.
And then they
Speaking, oh,
kind of used that first
oh,
round pick to get McTavish too. Whether I don't know if it was that
true.
exact one, but it
It
helped
might
them.
have been.
Might have been, but regardless, they end up with like three right in that range. So they kind of
Yes.
used we can kind of say they kind of used that to get McTavish. So it was McMichael and McTavish or Kyrie. What would you rather have? We'll find out.
I was going to use that segue as kind of a speaking of kind of not great. Kirby Doc's qualifying offer was 1 year, 4 million. Um, so that gets offered. We pretty much had like if he was offered that, he'd take it. Now, what ended up happening, and you, I think you might have it up in front of you with specifics, maybe. Um,
I remember. Yeah, I got it. I got it
you
ready to
got
go.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would say just go ahead and explain kind of. So he signs, excuse me, he signs a 1 year, 3.6, so 400K less than the qualifying offer. On the surface, that's weird, but it ultimately is not weird. Why?
And to further add to the weirdness, if he had went to arbitration, the arbitrator would have to award at least the qualifying offer.
Yeah.
But but the qualifying offer came with a very interesting caveat in that it is a two-way contract, meaning he gets paid a different salary if he's at the AHL or NHL level. So he would have been a very prime candidate for Montreal to put on waivers and stash in the AHL because an NHL team is not necessarily probably touching a $4 million cap hit for Kirby Doc. Maybe a couple teams might have taken a chance, but very possible he passes through waivers unclaimed. I don't know what the AHL salary would have been, but we're talking in the hundreds of thousands, most likely. And he was eligible, or Montreal was able to do that, I guess I should put it that way, because he just hasn't played enough games the past 3 years. Played under 60 this year and under 180 the past 3 seasons. That made him eligible for a two-way qualifying offer, which we were not aware of at the time of doing our projections. I don't know how we would have factored those in anyways.
Yeah.
We end up projecting two by like 2.25 because we weren't even sure he was going to get qualified.
Yep.
And then we also were like, well, maybe they just do a deal that smooths it a little bit more and gives a little bit more runway there too. But very interesting situation. So him taking the 1 year, 3.6 million, that's going to be a one-way contract. So if he were sent to the AHL, which I don't necessarily think was super likely, definitely not very likely right now, but he at least now has the insurance that he's getting paid the 3.6 million either way. The other thing this does is it walks him to unrestricted free agency. So I would expect this time next off season, he's either still looking for another team or have already signed somewhere else, looking for a fresh start.
Where are we headed now?
Well, I think we'll kind of I don't know if we have any other signings or smoke or anything outside of arbitration. I think we'll spend a couple minutes previewing that. Did a lot of work on Jamie Drysdale. Kind of we might put up an article, then we realized that our timeline is very short because Jamie Drysdale's arbitration hearing is Monday. In addition to Drysdale, we're still waiting on contracts for Jet Greaves, whose hearing would be Thursday. Jason Robertson, whose hearing will be Saturday.
Saturday the 25th, we should mention.
Yes, yes, not this upcoming Saturday. The first arbitration hearing is Monday the 20th, Jamie Drysdale.
Yep.
Robertson, Saturday the 25th. Next Monday the 27th, Cole Sillinger, and then a couple AHL guys, no offense to them. And then Akira Schmid, Saturday, August 1st, will be the last one of a little bit of interest to me, at least,
Yeah.
probably most casual NHL fans. So very important is the time for Drysdale to get a contract done is starting to run very short. Once both sides step into the arbitration room, they have to accept whatever the arbitrator awards. I don't remember off the top of my head what the walkaway price for the team would be, but it's pretty high. I think if it's like it's four, I think it's in the $4 to $5 million range. You could maybe fact check me real quickly. When James gets that number for us, we'll let you know that number. But basically, what that is a team has to accept that an award if it's below the whatever this walkaway threshold is. So award the players on the team at that price at that contract term. Since all of these were player elected arbitration, the team will be able to dictate the term on the deal. So most of these will ultimately be 1 year contracts because the team's not going to advocate for 2 years because it will take most likely walk these guys right to unrestricted free agency. Yep.
4.95 mil.
So yeah, my just about five. Okay. So basically 5 million above, a team could walk away from the contract. I think the only one that's I guess well, I don't think Dallas is walking away from a Jason Robertson arbitration award. Jet Greaves, I can't imagine Columbus is walking away if he came over five. I think they'd be okay. Drysdale, I don't think Philadelphia is walking away, but that could be a little bit of an interesting discussion. So, how does arbitration work? Well, both sides prepare an argument, generally focused on traditional box score type metrics, bringing other logical, tangible arguments into play. It doesn't have to just be box score metrics. But what is not 100% used are the advanced metrics. I think over time that's got to be creeping a little bit forward. You got to be using a little bit more, but it's going to be still pretty basic analytics. So like what's probably coming in is things that were being thought of as revolutionary 10, 15 years ago in the analytics space, like Corsi and expected goals are maybe starting to work their way into the sphere, but we're not talking like micro statistics with like zone entries, zone denials, breakout passes, shot assists, stuff like that. Those aren't going to necessarily be, I don't think, coming into arbitration discussion these days. If someone who's more familiar or who has, I guess, been in the room recently wants to correct me on that, send us a DM on X, and would love to maybe even do a future guest episode or something. If you're that much of an expert on it, we'd be down for that. Anyways, it's not a fun process because the goal of each side is to beat up the other side, basically. So the Flyers with Drysdale, we're going to use him as the example because I've put so much work and research into this
Mhm.
that might just go to waste anyways. The Flyers are going to walk in and try to make him look as bad as humanly possible as a player. And even maybe as a person too. Like they might say that he shows up late for meetings or workouts or doesn't stay on the ice as long as his teammates or whatever. That's all fair game. They could legitimately record what order everyone comes on and off the ice at every single practice and bring that up as a point. not a real fun process to sit there and basically be berated if you're a player by your employer. I don't think anyone in any jobs wants that to happen. And then Drysdale side's going to do the same thing and tell the Flyers organization why they're dumb and incompetent, basically, which isn't going to sit well with them.
Well, it's here's why I'm so much of a help to your
Yeah,
organization and why I'm the best.
yeah.
Maybe not that cocky, but pretty much.
But basically, both sides' gloves are off, and they're not holding back. So the minute they get in that room, it's going to get ugly, and that's why most players who end up going to arbitration are not still with their organization 3, 4, 5 years down the road. Always go back to PK Subban in Montreal as the prime example of that. Was just so ugly that by the time that was over, everyone knew there would not be a forever long-term relationship there because of
Yeah.
things that were said were just irreconcilable. So each side's going to come in with their compare with a list of comparable players in contracts that were signed. Generally, it'll be I'd be very interested to know how things are going to function because generally you go back 2, 3 years flat during the flat cap era, maybe you could have went back a little bit further, but now we're starting to get the end of the flat cap into the very much escalating salary cap. It's going to be very interesting how comps are presented because traditionally it's a look at raw average annual value, not necessarily percentage of cap. At some point, that's probably going to have to start to change because or they're going to have to expand what's allowable to use as a comp or something. There's got to be something to change a little bit
Yeah.
there. So I went back the past three off seasons, grabbed every defenseman who had at least 20 points in a season and was similar age, similar contract status, arbitration eligible to Jamie Drysdale. We have one. I'm doing need to get the fingers out. 4, 6. I think there are 8 guys: Byram, Laurie, Moser, Liljegren, Kesselring, Yoki Haru, Borgen, Nick Perbix fit a little bit of the criteria. And then this recently, we talked earlier in this episode, Braden Schneider. So 8, 9 guys, depending on where we want to include Perbix. The only one of those players that got more, or only 2 of those players that got more than mid threes, Byram with Buffalo last offseason, 6.25. And then Schneider right now this offseason with the Rangers, 5.5 million. So if you're Drysdale's camp, you're trying to prove why Drysdale looks like Byram and Schneider. Looking at the numbers, it's going to be very hard to get to Byram. Schneider, time on ice wise, is similar enough, especially in this, what we call the platform year, so the year leading into the contract. Production, Drysdale's stronger. Physicality, Schneider, I believe, grades out a little bit better. Be very, very interesting to see kind of how an argument around that would be structured. So Schneider might be the achievable one, but I think there's potentially some arguments also to be made about durability, and just playing substantial minutes year over year that Schneider is going to look better on than Drysdale will, but Drysdale has the production. So that would be a very interesting argument because once the argument gets too far away from Schneider, we're talking Mason Laurie and JJ Moser as very good comparables. And again, both of those contracts were, I believe, around the 3.2 range off the top of my head. That would be quite the drop if the Flyers kind of continue to push there. Do you have Drysdale's projection, our projection in front of you? I think it was in the fives.
I'm about to. Let's see here. So short term, we had one by 5.3. So that's right under
Schneider.
um Schneider, pretty
Yeah.
much.
So
It it's difficult now. I will say there were some older comps that kind of helped us bring him up. So it's very possible we're right around where he ends up. It's also kind of against the arbitration norm, everything you just laid out. Like maybe you can argue same sort of level of player as Schneider. I agree based on the stats we're looking at, not close to Byram. Um, and then there's a lot of other comps that are lower who were the past year, maybe two. I don't know if any of them go back as far as three, maybe. Maybe some
Yoki
of them do.
Haru and Borgen,
Okay.
who I don't think are the best. I think they go back 3 years, but Yoki Haru is
Okay.
maybe not too bad. Borgen's kind of different style of player.
Yeah. So I mean like it gets tough of also I think of everything you mentioned, one of the big things to key in on and kind of reiterate, arbitration historically it's usually talking AAVs, it's not talking cap hit percentage. So even these other guys that signed a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe three, who signed a little above three, we convert those and maybe we can get Drysdale a little above four. That's not traditionally how this process works, but maybe it starts to shift to that a little bit because of, again, just how much the cap is increasing year to year.
Yeah. Something's going to have to change at some point because the sample size for being valid in arbitration are going to continue to dwindle. Maybe there's a few more that signed just for covering restricted free agent years, not necessarily arbitration eligible, that maybe could be brought in the argument, but those are those are not going to be players that are going to help Drysdale's case. They're going to maybe help the team's case. I can't think of a defenseman that did a bridge contract recently covering just restricted free agent years of a higher level.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
the the real recent comp is Braden Schneider. Like that's that happening this week. Right shot defenseman, 24 years old, same age. A little bit different style, but maybe same level as far as kind of like maybe this guy's a solid second pair guy, hopefully. Schneider might end up on a third pair. We talked about that, but that feels very like, and just the fact that it is so recent and there are those kind of comparisons between the two for a process that is generally somewhat straightforward as far as what is referenced and not overly advanced. That seems like a very good spot for him to kind of fall of, oh, okay, 5.5 or roughly. We'll see. We'll see. And for all we know, we're recording this right now talking about Drysdale and they end up getting a long-term deal done,
yeah, yeah.
which I will say just for reference, we had 6 by 7.3. That's sticking out to me as just about Brant Clark money.
One more
I think
year.
one more year and a touch under. I think Clark was
Yeah.
7.4. But that could maybe make some sense. I don't think Drysdale's shown quite the same level of play as Clark, but both coming off of bridge deals already.
Well, Clark signed off his entry. He was a
Did
little
he?
bit, yeah, yeah. He's a little bit older. His entry slid a couple years. So this
Oh,
is
maybe that's what I'm
Clark's,
thinking.
yeah, Clark's second contract. So if Drysdale came in very similar contract, it would, because he would be buying less unrestricted year, or Drysdale would be buying more unrestricted years than Clark. A similar contract would be valuing Drysdale a little bit less because they're
Which is,
putting a little bit lower value on the unrestricted years.
yeah,
So we could back into being very correct on the long-term projection, even though
potentially.
everything around it has shifted. But
Yeah, yeah, true.
and just to reiterate the last play on arbitration here, and then we'll probably wrap this episode up. These players can't be offer sheeted. So I know that these hearings are coming up, but Jason Robertson next Saturday, just over a week from when you're hopefully listening to this because you subscribe
Mhm.
and you listen right when the episode comes out, he can't be offer sheeted in the next week. Not possible. And the other important thing is once they go into that room, they're bound by the arbitrator's decision, which drops, I believe, about 48 hours after the end of the hearing or start of the hearing or something. So about 2 days later,
Yep.
they're bound by that. And usually what ends up happening is the player will have an ask that's way above what seems reasonable. So Drysdale will go in with an ask of like 7 million. The team will go in with like an offer of 2, and then the arbitrator will return a award of like 4.5 to 5.5, right in the midpoint. Because that's always what happens, even though it's again an antiquated, outdated process. There's so many things wrong with the logic of how they get there, but usually that's what happens is the award ends up between the two asks and whatever.
Last thing, Stevie Y sort of out in Detroit.
Oh yeah, we were gonna spend more time on that, but you know,
It's not going to be much time because we shouldn't go too much longer, but just general reaction there. I'll give you mine. I don't understand what they're doing, and here's why. Fully on board with him not being in charge anymore. I don't think it has gone well in Detroit. Him being around still as an advisor to the owner, that's a red flag to me if I'm anyone that is interviewing to replace him.
whether just in title or like not, but yes.
It could just be in title. Even so, optic wise, I don't like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I so my two questions that I would have overall are why are you waiting until now to make the move? And I
Well, the
think
other
it
thing is
ties
he stepped back. So are they just letting him save face because he's a franchise legend?
yes. Yes.
Probably.
Yes.
But again, just optic wise, like this, that does not attract me to Detroit. There's other things that can attract you to Detroit for sure, but like I optic wise, I don't love just the way this played out.
Even him making the decision to step back again, why are you making it this deep into the off season at this
Yeah.
point? Free agency's done.
Well, it is probably he's not stepping back. They are
Yes.
looking to move on from him, but also why are you making that decision right now and
Yes.
not
Correct.
2 months ago?
So my next question, and I think question one is answered by this. Does this change the Larkin situation? And I think that's why the Yzerman moving out of the decision making role ultimately came down because a lot of people are talking like this might mean that Larkin's more likely to stay. I think this is the opposite, that they want someone to come in and actually get the deal done and stop having this linger over the franchise. And Yzerman was not going to do that. The
Very
other
possible.
the other kind of related thing that I would, and we've discussed this at length, this Simon Edvinson contract that has to get done. He's still eligible for an offer sheet, by the way.
Yeah.
We know how much Yzerman grinded down Raymond and Sider
Cider. Yep.
to make sure that they kept to a specific salary structure. That can't continue to happen with Edvinson and DeBrincat needing an extension potentially this summer. If Yzerman was stuck in that way, those deals were just going nowhere. So I also wonder how much of a fear of an offer sheet for Edvinson, losing DeBrincat for nothing. Just basically, there's three big decisions that it doesn't seem like Yzerman was going to approach in the right manner. And it feels like that's why the move was made. So I kind of answered my own question, but
Well, I mean, all of that is absolutely valid. There's also, and I feel like this wasn't said much when the Larkin request came out, but this is your hometown guy, the franchise star captain wants out, and reasoning behind wanting out, I don't think anyone's going to know that for sure. It seems plausible that the team's just not gotten to a point where he would expect it to get. Who is that on? You can argue it's not just front office, it could be the players themselves, whatever. But the plan has not really come to fruition at all. That's traditionally on the front office. I think it was just time
oh,
across the
it's
board,
been
and there
past time.
it's been past time. But you're as you laid out, it's creeping up on multiple major decisions that it just seems like the status quo of kind of grinding out the contract talks and, as you said, sticking to a specific structure, like that's not really going to work in today's NHL.
Yep. So I guess more or less likely, we'll conclude here, more or less likely Dylan Larkin starts the season on the Detroit Red Wings with the news of Yzerman no longer being the GM.
So I've thought about exactly what you said, and I lean towards that still. Um, at the same time, would it shock me if they put out a Columbus Zach Werenski type of statement? No. It just that feels less likely at this point in the entire situation. So I would still lean towards he's moved, but um I wouldn't be I'm closer to 50% again. I've moved in that direction.
I moved more likely that he's moved. I
Okay.
To me that's why this move was made, is because ownership
Very
sees the
possible.
writing on the wall and wants to get this distraction out of the way. And
Yeah.
Yzerman was not going to do it.
Oh yeah, it's more if a big part of the hang up for Larkin was I don't this isn't working with who we have in charge. I want out, and now that's changing. That's where like we don't know.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of people are pointing to. And I'm just taking the opposite approach, right or wrong.
Which quite possibly is the correct one.
Yeah.
We'll see.
We will see. We'll be watching Dylan Larkin. We'll be watching Connor Hellebuyck. We'll be watching the arbitration hearings. We'll particularly Drysdale and Jason Robertson. And you should be watching us on YouTube, AFP Analytics, as well as listening us to on wherever you get your podcast. Max Stern Podcast is available. And subscribing afpanalytics.com, looking at content there, and then following us on X, Blue Sky, Threads at AFP Analytics. We appreciate you listening, tuning in, watching, commenting, subscribing, all that good stuff. And we will talk to you next time.